The moment she threw the food in the trash, the entire diner went quiet. Not the gradual quiet of conversations trailing off. The immediate, complete dropped glass quiet of a room full of people who have just witnessed something so specific in its cruelty that the collective body of the space cannot process it fast enough to maintain the ordinary noise of lunch. 42 people in a diner in Beaumont, Texas on a Wednesday afternoon in July, and every single one of them stopped chewing, stopped talking, stopped pretending they had not been watching for the past 6 minutes. I was one of those 42 people. I was sitting in the corner booth nearest the window, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that I had chosen because it faced the room, and I have always been the kind of person who needs to see the room. I had ordered coffee and a slice of pecan pie, and I was grading papers because I am a high school English teacher, and it was summer, and summer is when the grading that did not get done during the year finally gets done. I was not looking for a story. I was not looking for anything except the specific peace of a diner in the afternoon and the sugar of a good pie and the quiet satisfaction of work being done. What I found instead was the kind of moment that a person carries for the rest of their life, not because it was the worst thing they had ever seen, but because of what came after it. And what came after it was something that none of us in that diner, not one of us, could have predicted when we watched a young waitress in a yellow uniform take a plate of food that belonged to an old woman and drop it in the trash. Let me tell you about the old woman first. Let me tell you about her the way she deserves to be told about, which is completely and with the specific attention that the world had decided she did not merit that afternoon, but which she had been earning for longer than most people in that diner had been alive. Her name, as I would learn later, was Ida Mee Washington. She was 81 years old. She was a small woman, perhaps 5 feet at her full height, wearing a floral house dress in blues and greens and a pair of white sneakers that were clean and carefully maintained, the sneakers of a woman who takes care of what she has. Her hair was silver and pressed, and she wore a pair of small gold earrings that caught the afternoon light when she turned her head. She had come into the diner alone, walking with the careful, deliberate pace of a woman who has learned that the ground is not always as reliable as it looks, and she had settled into the counter stool at the far end with the practiced economy of someone who has been getting themselves situated in public spaces alone for a very long time. She had ordered, as I could see from my corner booth, a hot meal. The blue plate special, which the chalkboard beside the register said was chicken and dumplings with cornbread and a side of greens and a glass of sweet tea, and which cost $8.75. She had opened her purse and she had counted out the money carefully, the way people count money when they know exactly what they have and exactly what they can spend, and she had placed it on the counter with the neatness of someone who respects every dollar because every dollar was earned at a cost. The waitress who took her order was a young white woman, perhaps 22, in the yellow uniform of the diner with her name on a badge that I could see from my booth said Kayla. Kayla had taken the order with the minimum of engagement, the specific economy of attention that tells you a person has already made a preliminary assessment of whether someone is worth their full engagement and found them wanting. She had written the order and gone to the kitchen, and when the food came up, she had brought it to the counter and set it in front of Ida, me, and that should have been the end of the transaction. It was not the end of the transaction. What happened next is what I want to tell you about, and I want to tell you about it with the precision it deserves because it was not an accident and it was not ambiguous, and the 42 people in that diner who witnessed it understood exactly what they were witnessing. Ida Mee, having received her food, reached into her purse again. She produced a small container, a little plastic container that she had clearly brought from home, And she opened it and she began to add something to her greens, something from the container, a seasoning of some kind, the way that people who know how they like their food season it themselves because diners cannot be expected to know your preferences. It was a small and ordinary and entirely reasonable thing to do. Kayla, who was passing behind the counter, stopped. She looked at the container. She looked at Ida me. She said something that I was not close enough to hear but whose tone traveled clearly across the diner even if the words did not, a sharp, dismissive tone, and Ida me looked up and said something in response, quiet and calm, and Kayla said something else and then, before anyone in that diner had fully processed what was happening, Kayla reached across the counter and picked up Ida me's plate. The plate with the chicken and dumplings and the cornbread and the greens that had cost $8.75 that Ida me had counted out carefully from her purse that she had not taken a single bite of. Kayla walked to the trash can behind the counter. She dropped the plate into the trash. She said loud enough for the whole diner to hear this part that outside food was not permitted in the establishment and that the meal was contaminated and could not be served. The diner went silent. Ida me sat at the counter and looked at the space where her plate had been. She did not cry. She did not make a sound. She simply looked at the empty counter in front of her with the expression of a woman who has received this variety of cruelty before, who has learned what her face needs to do in these moments, who has trained herself across 81 years of life in this country to manage her reaction in public because the reaction of a black woman to her own mistreatment has always been more dangerous than the mistreatment itself. She reached into her purse. She began to gather the money she had left on the counter. As I put down my pen, I want to be honest about something before I tell you what I did next. I want to be honest because I think honesty about these moments is the only thing that makes them useful. I sat in that booth for approximately 4 seconds after Ida me's food hit the trash, and in those 4 seconds I ran a calculation that I am not proud of, the same calculation that the other 41 people in that diner were also running, the calculation of whether to say something and what the cost of saying something would be and whether the cost was manageable. I ran that calculation, and then I put it down and I got up. I walked to the counter. I said to Kayla, clearly and without aggression but clearly, that what I had just witnessed appeared to be a discriminatory act against a customer who had done nothing wrong and that I wanted to speak with the manager immediately. Kayla looked at me. Her expression was the expression I had anticipated, the specific expression of a young person who has been confronted about something they did not expect to be confronted about in public, a mixture of defiance and the first flicker of uncertainty. She said the policy was the policy and the customer had brought in outside food which was against the rules. I looked at the trash can. I looked at Ida me. I said that the customer had brought in a small personal seasoning container and that I had been in many restaurants where guests brought their own condiments and that I had never in my life seen a restaurant respond by disposing of a customer's purchased meal without a refund, and that I would like to speak with the manager now. The manager appeared from the back. He was a man in his 50s, heavyset, in a collared shirt with the diner's logo, and he came out with the expression of a man who has been interrupted at something and is not pleased about it. He listened to Kayla's account of events. He did not ask for Ida me's account. He said the policy was in place for health code reasons and that the situation had been handled and that he hoped I was enjoying my pie. I said I was not enjoying my pie at the moment and that what I was hoping was that the customer who had just had her food thrown away would receive a refund and an apology, and that if neither of those things happened, I intended to document this incident and share it widely because what I had watched happen in this diner in the past 6 minutes was something that the public deserved to know about. The manager said he would issue a refund. He said it without the apology. I turned to Ida me. She was still at the counter. She had not left during this exchange, and I think the reason she had not left was the same reason that the other 41 people in the diner had not yet left. which is that the room understood something was happening and had not yet resolved and leaving before resolution felt wrong. I said to Ida Me that the manager had agreed to refund her money and that I was sorry about what had happened and that I wanted to know if she would allow me to sit with her and if I could buy her something else to eat somewhere else, somewhere that would not treat her this way. She looked at me. She looked at me the way that older black women sometimes look at younger black women when they are deciding something, with an assessment that is fast and complete and does not miss anything. Then she said quietly that she appreciated my kindness and that she had a better idea. I said, "What is the idea?" She said, "Just wait a few minutes." I looked at her. She looked at me. Something in her expression told me that the instruction to wait was not the instruction of a woman who was waiting for nothing. It was the instruction of a woman who had already done something before she walked into this diner and who knew that what she had done was going to arrive. She reached into her purse. She took out a phone, a simple flip phone, the kind that has been out of fashion for 15 years and that certain people still carry because they know what they need and they do not need more than that. She opened it. She looked at the screen, then she closed it and put it back in her purse and she folded her hands on the counter and she waited. I sat down on the stool beside her. The diner around us had not fully returned to its ordinary noise. People were watching, some were on their phones. Two people near the back had left. The rest had stayed, and I understood that the rest had stayed for the same reason I had stayed, which is that something was not over. 4 minutes passed. I know it was 4 minutes because I was watching the clock on the wall above the register, the round clock with the diner's name on it, the way you watch a clock when time has become specific and important. At 4 minutes, the sound began. It was not a loud sound at first. It was the sound of engines, multiple engines, the low rumble of heavy vehicles, the kind of sound that you feel in your chest before you fully hear it with your ears. The sound grew over approximately 30 seconds, growing from a felt vibration to an audible rumble to something that was unmistakably a convoy of vehicles arriving in the parking lot of a diner on a Wednesday afternoon in Beaumont, Texas. Several people in the diner went to the windows. What they saw and what I saw when I turned on my stool to look through the plate glass was 7 black vehicles pulling into the parking lot of Ida Me's diner. 7 black SUVs with tinted windows arriving in precise convoy formation, not the casual parking of ordinary customers, but the organized arrival of a security detail, and with them 2 additional vehicles that were clearly press vehicles, satellite equipment on the roofs, logos on the sides, local television news. The diner was completely silent again. The door opened. The man who walked in was tall. He was perhaps 65, silver-haired, black, wearing a suit that cost more than my car payment, and he was not alone. He came in with 2 people on either side and 2 people behind, and every one of those people had the specific body language of someone whose job is to be aware of every exit and every unknown in a room at all times. He walked directly to the counter. He walked directly to Ida Me. He sat down on the stool on her other side, the stool on the side I was not on, and he put his arm around her shoulders. And Ida Me Washington, who had not made a sound when her food was thrown in the trash, who had maintained her composure through every second of the past 14 minutes, leaned her silver head against his shoulder. He said to the room in general and to no one specifically in the voice of a man who is accustomed to rooms listening when he speaks, "This is my mother." The silence in that diner was the specific silence of people understanding something that has just rearranged everything they thought they knew about the past 14 minutes. The manager had come out from the back again. He stood behind the counter looking at the man in the expensive suit with the security detail and the press vehicles outside. His face had gone through several colors in rapid succession. The man looked at the manager. He said with complete calm that he had received a message from his mother 20 minutes ago telling him where she was and what had happened. He said he had been in a meeting in downtown Beaumont when that message arrived and that he had ended the meeting and come directly here. He said he wanted to understand what had happened to his mother's food. The manager said there had been a misunderstanding about the policy. The man said he would like to see the policy. The manager said he would get the written policy. He went to the back. He did not return for several minutes, and when he did return, he did not have a written policy because, as I and everyone else in that diner already understood, there was no written policy that said a paying customer's food could be disposed of because they had brought in a personal seasoning container. The man waited. He sat on that stool beside his mother, and he waited with the specific patience of someone who is very powerful and very angry, and has learned that patience is more effective than either of those things and uses it accordingly. I want to pause here and tell you who this man was, because I know you are wondering and because knowing changes the texture of everything that follows. His name was Governor James Edward Washington. He had been the governor of the state of Texas for 6 years, the first black man elected to that office in the history of the state, and he was in Beaumont that Wednesday because he had been scheduled to appear at a regional economic development conference, and he had left that conference 14 minutes after receiving a flip phone text from his 81-year-old mother telling him she was at Ida Mee's diner on Commerce Street and something had happened to her food. His mother, Ida Mee Washington, who had named herself after the diner because the diner had been named after her. The sign above the door, Ida Mee's Diner, the name on the chalkboard, the name on the manager's collared shirt, the name of the establishment in which a young waitress had thrown Ida Mee Washington's food in the trash and told her that outside condiments were not permitted. She had come to her own diner and been treated as if she had no right to be there. So I want to tell you the full history of Ida Mee's Diner because I think it is the most important part of this story, the part that everything else is built around, the part that gives the 14 minutes before the convoy arrived their full and complete weight. Ida Mee Washington had opened the diner in 1974. She had opened it with money saved across 12 years of domestic work, cleaning houses and cooking in other people's kitchens, while she raised James Edward and his two younger sisters in a two-bedroom house in the east side of Beaumont. She had found the building, a former hardware store on Commerce Street, and she had negotiated the lease herself, and she had done the renovation herself with the help of her brother and two cousins and her church community who came on Saturdays and Sundays for 6 weeks to build what she had envisioned. She had opened on a Monday morning in April of 1974, and she had worked that diner for 32 years, through economic downturns and neighborhood changes and the specific challenges of a black woman running a business in Texas in the 1970s and 1980s, challenges that would fill their own story and deserve their own telling. She had fed the community. She had employed the community. She had extended credit to people who needed it and provided meals to people who could not pay for them and been the kind of establishment that a neighborhood builds its identity around. In 2006, when her son was beginning the career in law and then in politics that would eventually take him to the governor's mansion, and when her hands were beginning to feel the 32 years of diner work in ways that made the long days harder, Ida Mee had sold the diner. She had sold it to new owners on the condition, she told me later, that the name remain, that the name on the sign stay Ida Mee's, that was her condition. The new owners agreed, the name stayed, and then over the years and through the changes of ownership that happen with businesses, the name had stayed but the institutional memory of what it meant had not. New staff hired by new managers knew the name on the sign the same way they knew the name on any sign, as brand rather than biography, as identification rather than history. Kayla had been working at Ida Mee's Diner for 7 months. She had never known that the woman the diner was named after was a real woman who still lived in Beaumont and who sometimes, on a Wednesday afternoon, came in for the blue plate special and a glass of sweet tea. She had thrown Ida Mee Washington's food in the trash. At the diner named after Ida Mee Washington, I want to tell you about what happened in the hour that followed the governor's arrival because that hour was one of the most remarkable things I have ever sat at a counter and watched, and I have been a witness to some things in my 53 years of life. The press came in. The two camera crews from the vehicles in the parking lot, and then two more who had received word by some mechanism I did not observe and arrived within 20 minutes. The governor did not make a statement immediately. He did not perform for the cameras. He sat beside his mother at the counter and he held her hand and he spoke to her quietly for a while and the room gave them that. Then he stood up. He was not angry in the way that a man with his resources and his authority could have chosen to be angry, the way that would have made headlines of a different kind. He was something more measured and more devastating than angry. He was clear. He said he wanted to speak not about his title or his office, but about his mother. He said that the woman sitting beside him at this counter had worked for 60 years to build a life of dignity for her family and her community. That she had opened the diner they were all standing in 52 years ago with 12 years of savings. That she had fed this community through good times and hard times. And that she had come in on a Wednesday afternoon to have a meal and had been treated in a way that no customer should be treated and no human being should be treated. He said that the question of what should happen to the employees involved was a matter for the owners of the business and the laws of the state, and that he had confidence those processes would unfold appropriately. He said that was not what he wanted to talk about. He said he wanted to talk about the other 30 people in the diner when it happened. The 30 people, he said, looking around the room, several of whom were still present, who had watched an 81-year-old woman have her food thrown away and had sat with their coffee and their pie. He said he was not asking for an accounting. He was not placing blame. But he said that the moments in which we are bystanders to the mistreatment of other people are the moments that define the communities we live in, and that the question of who speaks up and who stays silent is a question that a healthy community has to ask itself. He looked at me then. He had been informed, apparently by his security team who had been quietly gathering information since they arrived, that I had been the one person at the counter who had spoken up before his convoy arrived. He said there was one person in this room who stood up, and I want her to know that it mattered, even if it didn't feel like enough, even if the outcome required more than one person. It mattered. I am not going to tell you that I handled that moment with grace. I am going to tell you that I sat on a diner stool in Beaumont, Texas, with my half-eaten pecan pie and my ungraded English papers, and I cried. Not performed crying, the real kind, the kind that arrives because a combination of the injustice of the past 14 minutes and the beauty of what the governor had just said and the image of Ida Mee's silver head on her son's shoulder had exceeded the capacity of my composure. Ida Mee reached over and patted my hand. She said, "Baby, don't cry, everything turns out." She said it like someone who knows. Like someone who has 81 years of evidence for the proposition that everything, eventually, in one form or another, turns out. Later that afternoon, after the cameras had gone and the convoy had driven Ida Mee to a proper lunch somewhere that was not a diner with complicated feelings about its own history, I sat with my cold coffee and I thought about the flip phone. About the fact that Ida Mee Washington had a son who was the governor of Texas and who would come when she sent a message, and that she had sent the message before the food hit the trash, that she had known or sensed or been in the situation enough times that she had called for what she needed before the worst of it was over. There is something about that which has stayed with me more than the convoy or the cameras or even the governor's speech. The flip phone. The knowledge of your own worth, maintained across 81 years in a world that has spent considerable energy trying to convince you otherwise. The reaching for what you deserve, not as a dramatic act, not as a performance, but as a quiet matter of fact understanding that help exists and you have the right to call for it. She did not wait for someone to rescue her. She called for what she needed. She sat at that counter with dignity and she counted out her money and she waited for what she had sent for because she knew what she was worth and she knew that the world had more information about that than Kayla did, and she was patient enough to let that information arrive. I have thought about Kayla too. About what it costs to be someone who sees an elderly black woman come into a diner on a Wednesday afternoon and makes the specific assessment that Kayla made. The assessment that this person is someone to be managed rather than served. That her small container of personal seasoning is an occasion for the exercise of the tiny authority of a counter position. That the rules exist to be applied to her in ways they are not applied to everyone. I have thought about where that assessment comes from and how it gets built into a person and what it would take to dismantle it, because it does not appear spontaneously and it does not belong only to one 22-year-old waitress in a yellow uniform. It is a thing that is taught by the culture we live in and the assumptions we absorb and the ways that people are sorted by who gets the benefit of the doubt and who does not. I am not excusing what Kayla did. I am trying to understand the full shape of it, because I think you can only change things you fully understand. And a 22-year-old who does not know that the woman at the counter is the woman on the sign is not the beginning of the problem. She is a symptom of a problem that runs much deeper and much further back, and that is going to require more than one convoy and more than one governor and more than one person speaking up at a diner counter to address. But the convoy and the governor and the person at the counter are all part of it, and all of it matters. I want to say something about what happened in the weeks after, because this story did not end in the parking lot of a diner on Commerce Street in Beaumont. It continued in the ways that stories like this sometimes continue when they arrive at the right moment in the right place. The video had been taken by three separate people in the diner, the act of throwing the food away and the minutes that followed, and it was on the internet before the governor's convoy had fully departed the parking lot. It reached, within 24 hours, a number of people that I am still somewhat awed by when I think about it. It reached people in every state and several other countries. It reached people who had never been to Beaumont and would never go. People who knew nothing about the history of the diner and the history of the woman it was named for. People who watched a 20-second clip of food being thrown in a trash can and felt, in that 20 seconds, the full weight of a history they had not personally lived but somehow recognized. The diner's new ownership group, which was based in Houston and managed a portfolio of regional restaurant brands, issued a statement within 18 hours. Kayla was no longer employed by the diner. The manager was placed on administrative leave pending a review. These were the expected responses, the procedural acknowledgments of a situation that had become visible enough to require them. What was less expected, and what I think is the more interesting part of the aftermath, was what Ida Me did. She did not sue. She did not call for the diner to be closed. She did not use the platform that the moment had created for anything other than what she had apparently decided before the convoy arrived, which was to call attention to something she had seen enough times to know needed to be called attention to. She gave one interview to a reporter from a Beaumont paper that had been covering the city for 120 years. And in that interview, she said the following, which I am telling you from memory because I read it so many times that it became part of what I know. She said she had not gone to the diner to make a point. She had gone because she wanted chicken and dumplings, and it was a Wednesday and she was hungry. She said that what happened to her happened to people every day in places all over this country, and that most of those people did not have a son who could send a convoy, and most of those incidents did not get filmed, and most of those women sat at their counters alone until they left. And that was the thing she wanted people to think about. Not the convoy. The women who leave alone. She said she wanted the young people who had watched the video to understand that dignity is not something that is granted. It is something you carry. That she had been carrying hers for 81 years and a trash can had not diminished it and a yellow uniform had not diminished it and the manager who would not make eye contact had not diminished it. That the only person in that diner who had any power over her dignity that afternoon was her. She said she was going to go back to the diner on Thursday. She said if she was going to have chicken and dumplings on Wednesdays, she was going to have them at a place that had her name on it, and that she was not going to let one bad Wednesday take that from her. She went back on Thursday. The same counter stool at the far end, the same blue plate special. The new manager brought it out himself. She reached into her purse and produced her small plastic container of seasoning and she added it to her greens and she ate her lunch and she left a $2 tip. That is the end of the story of what happened. But I want to tell you what the story gave me because I think what it gave me is the reason I am still telling it. It gave me Ida Me's words about dignity. The understanding that what we carry inside us is not what other people decide to give us and it is not what they decide to take. I am a high school English teacher. I stand in front of young people every day who are in the process of figuring out who they are and how much they are worth and what happens to their worth when the world does not affirm it. I have been trying for 22 years to give them something in a classroom that will hold them when the world does what it does. I think what Ida Me gave me on that Wednesday in July was the best description I have ever heard of the thing I am trying to give them. Dignity is not something that is granted. It is something you carry. The carrying is the work. The carrying is the lifetime. The carrying is the flip phone and the straight back and the silver hair and the $2 tip. If this story reached you today, if any part of it felt true or felt like something you needed, I want you to do one thing right now. Subscribe to Black Diamonds and hit the notification bell because we are here every single week with stories exactly like this one. The stories about dignity and what it costs to maintain it and what happens when the world finally has to see what it has been dismissing. You do not want to miss what is coming next. And in the comments right now, I want your name and your city. Just your name and where you are watching from. Because this channel reaches everywhere and every person watching has a version of Ida Me's story in their family or their own life or the lives of the people they love, and every single one of those stories deserves to be counted. Drop your name and your city right now. I read every comment. Everyone, my name is Patricia. I am telling you this story from Atlanta, Georgia, where I teach English to young people who are trying to figure out what they are worth, and where I am going to walk into my classroom in September with something I did not have in July, which is the right words for what I have always been trying to tell them. Carry it. Whatever they take, whatever they throw away, whatever they say does not belong, carry it, because the convoy is coming. It just needs to know where you are. Next week on Black Diamonds, I am going to tell you about a woman who was told by a hospital that her insurance was invalid, who sat in a waiting room for 3 hours while her condition worsened, who discovered that the denial had been made by someone who had never looked at her file, and what happened when the person who denied her found out who was sitting in that waiting room. Subscribe right now and turn on your notifications. I will see you next week. The sign still says Ida Mees. It always will.